A crisis has a way of focusing our attention, doesn't it? When you feel like your back is against the wall, you get that difficult diagnosis, you get a hard piece of news that you didn't expect. A crisis has a way of focusing our attention and trying to marshal our resources and respond to what is going on. So in the first letter of Peter, we hear these words: "The end of all things is near." That would get your attention, right? "The end of all things is near. Therefore be serious and discipline yourselves for the sake of your prayers." Nero was the emperor of Rome, and he was considered to be a person that was on the edge of madness. And a fire broke out in Rome, and it burnt for 3 days and 3 nights. It decimated half the city. And rumors began to circulate that Nero had set the fire. And there were stories that as the fires burned in Rome, that Nero played music. So the people of Rome began to grumble, and they began to rise up against Nero. And Nero knew he needed a scapegoat. He needed to take the attention from himself and focus it on someone else. And so he thought of this fledgling little religious group called Christians, which is another way of saying little Christ, followers of this prophet that came out of Nazareth called Jesus. And so Nero decided to put the blame on the Christians so it wouldn't be focused on himself. And he called his soldiers to round up the Christians, to throw them into jail, and in some cases to persecute them and put them to death. And so that results in this phrase: "The end of all things is near. Therefore be serious and discipline yourselves for the focus of your prayers." You need to focus on what's essential, on what is of uttermost importance, says Peter. You need to focus on what really matters. Crises have a way of focusing our attention, right? A couple of years ago, I got a phone call from a woman who I'll call Lenore. And Lenore said, "I don't attend your church. I haven't attended any church for about 20 years, and when I did, it was down in the Carolinas. But I've been dealing with some serious health issues for the last few years. I've had a whole host of surgeries, and my doctor has told me that there's nothing more they can do. I have 6 months at most to live, and I need a church, and I need a pastor. Will you be that person, and can this church, we here, First Baptist Beverly, be that congregation?" And without having met face to face, I said yes. And so for the next several months, I would be invited into Lenore's life. I would meet her 2 daughters. I would meet her new grandchild. I would get to know her husband. I would get to know some of her friends. And she talked about how being a woman in her mid-50s, how this was so hard to grasp, saying goodbye to those that she loved so much. And so we walked together as her illness progressed, as her abilities became even more limited. And about 2 months before she was to die, she said, "I'd like to plan my funeral, and I'd like you to help me plan a party to follow, where I can say what I need to say to my loved ones." And so I said, "What is it you want to accomplish in the next couple of months?" She said, "There's some people that I've lost touch with that were important to me when I was young, and I want to get back in touch with them and send them a letter or make a phone call and just say thank you." And so she did that in her last few months. And then she said, "There's some people that I've fallen out with, people who have hurt me or hurt someone I've loved or whom I have hurt, And I want to just say to them, I wish the very best for your life. And she did that. And she said, I want to say thank you to my coworkers who have donated their sick time and their vacation time for all the time I've had to be away from work because of my multiple surgeries. I want to say how much I appreciate what they've done for me and my family. And she did that. And then she said, I want to say thank you, most of all, to my family. I want to write a letter to my husband and to our daughters and to my grandchild, who I will not see grow up, and the children I will never know, who will come when I'm gone, and I want to write a letter to each one of them. And she did that. And I felt so privileged to walk with Lenore through those last months of her life. And on Easter morning, when I was driving back from being at Lynch Park to see the sun come up, on Easter morning, I got a phone call that Lenore had just passed into God's love, and could I gather with her family and a few close friends who had been with Lenore when she took her last breath. And I did that. Crises have a way of focusing our life. Lenore chose to focus on what matters most to her and to share her love to those who were most important. Peter wants his readers, in the uncertain times within which they were living, to be focused on what truly matters. In verse 8 through 9, he says, this is the essence. If you want to boil it down to what is most important, verse 8 and 9, above all, maintain constant love for one another, for love covers a multitude of sins, and be hospitable to one another. Now, there are three words in the Greek language that the writer of Peter could have chosen to describe this type of love. The first word in Greek, which he could have chosen but did not, is from the word eros, summed up in that great Hebrew phrase, va, 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 voom. That's eros. That's when the skyrockets go off. Brian, when you looked at Cynthia across the room for the first time down in Newport, Rhode Island, that was eros. It's a wonderful type of love, but it is not the love that is spoken here. The other is filial love. It's fraternal love for those that we have a bond with, those who share our blood, those that we have familial ties. Filial love, but that is not the type of love that Peter speaks of. It is agape love. And agape love is the deepest and truest type of love. It is a selfless love that comes not from us, but as we strive to reflect just a little bit, a glimmer of God's love. It's a love that wants the best for another. It's a love that wants to build up those that we like and those that we may rub against. It is that love, it is that grace that Peter is saying is the way of Jesus and that we are offer to one another. Above all, maintain constant agape, constant love for one another. And then he says in verse 10, like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each one of you has received. Peter wants his followers then and the followers of Jesus today to know that we are each graced with special gifts and talents, entrusted to our care to use for the common good, to build up and to restore, a love to offer to those who are like us and those who are different than us. We are each entrusted, says Peter, with a gift, an ability, a talent to share for others. The Church of Jesus Christ fulfills our calling as we choose to share our gifts with one another. And that's what Stewardship Sunday is about, the season of stewardship. It's our choice to focus on what matters, focus on what's important, to use our time, our talent, and our treasure to work for the common good within these walls, and most importantly, beyond the walls of this church. This is called the gospel of abundance. This is called generosity. This is called using what God has entrusted to our care, small gifts, humble gifts, dramatic gifts, whatever they may be. Every gift has equal worth in the eyes of God, we're told in Scripture, and we choose to share it. This is the opposite of what's going on in politics in our own country and in countries around the world. This idea of hyper-nationalism and promoting our own cause is contrary to the way of Peter and contrary to the one that Peter followed, the way of Jesus. Because it's not about me, it's not about mine, but it's about ours. It's about us. It's not about them. It's about seeing each other through the eyes of God. And Peter wanted us, his followers then and us today, to focus on what really lasts, that which is essential. It's about constant love, constant agape for one another. So what does it look like when people put the way of Jesus and the words of Peter into practice? When I was a young pastor and Tricia and I were living in Cleveland, Ohio, there was a little lady named Mildred Morse, 4 feet 10 inches. Sam would tower over Mildred Morse. And Mildred had lost a lot of things. She was in her mid-80s. She had lost her husband. And then she had to sell her home. And then she began to lose her physical abilities. And I remember visiting Mildred in the nursing home. And there was this little lady in this big bed. And I said, "Mildred, how are you doing?" And I knew if I were in her shoes that I would be struggling. And there was this big smile on Mildred's face, a smile that was characteristic of who she was. And she said, "I've made a choice." She said, "I can focus on what I've lost, I can focus on what I no longer have, or I can focus on what I have right now." And she said, "The lady in the bed next to me is really struggling. And the staff are overworked. And if I can bring a little comfort and a little hope and a smile to those who are around me, granted," she said, "my world has gotten much smaller, but if I can be a blessing, then I still have a purpose. I still have work to do." Have you ever met a person who understands to the very core of their being the essence of the gospel? Who has a sense of joy because they understand their purpose, which is to not hoard love, but to give it away. Mildred Moore suffered a lot of losses. And she was a little lady, but she was expansive in her love. It was extraordinary. In February, several of us went down to Nicaragua to work with Amos Health and Hope. We went to the village of Apantillo out in the mountains, and Brian, it's pretty rugged out there, right? Pretty rugged, climbing those mountains. And there was a lady named Ada Luz, who is the health promoter. She's the only health promoter to serve on a weekly basis 1,300 people who live in little subsistence farms out in the mountains. And Ada Luz, it's not uncommon for her to do a house call, to walk 3 hours to get to a farm where someone is pregnant or they've just had a baby, to do a house call, and then to walk 3 hours back. That's the ministry that we help provide because we've become a partner congregation with Amos. But Ada Luz, after we had visited her in February and saw the extraordinary work that this young woman, single mom, was doing, had some serious health issues herself. And I asked Dr. Laura Perrahone, who works with Ada Luz, how she was doing, how her health was, and who had taken Ada Luz's place, at least temporarily. And Dr. Laura said there was really no one available with the training to take Ada Luz's place. And that Ada Luz had asked for a horse to take her on her rounds to go and visit people in these little subsistence farms in this rugged mountainous terrain. And when asked, she said, "I have been graced with a gift. And if I don't go, who will?" There are certain people who get captured by this abundant love that Peter speaks of and Jesus bore witness to. And it's extraordinary. On Monday evening, as Julie was saying, we'll have an opportunity to go and stand and pack our city hall and to say the word YIMBY, yes in my backyard, to affordable housing. 76 units. 15 units are set aside for people who are currently homeless. And that if this is approved, which God willing it will be, there will be 76 households that are affordable to our neighbors. Above all, maintain constant love for one another, says Peter, for love covers a multitude of sins, and be hospitable to one another. It's extraordinary to see what happens when we, as people of faith, focus on what is really important. When we live our lives in keeping with that which really matters. It's extraordinary. This is the good news. Thanks be to God, and may God's people say, amen.